Jackie Chan was in the first-class row, dressed simply, a stark contrast to the luxury around him. A man looked at him with disdain, unable to hide his arrogance. What happened next left everyone on the plane completely speechless and changed a life forever. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we'll have another special story for you. Los Angeles Airport was as busy as ever, people coming and going, conversations mingling, and luggage rolling in all directions. In the midst of all this, one man was standing calmly in the first-class queue. That man was Jackie Chan. He was wearing a plaid shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed boots. He carried a backpack that looked like it had already traveled the world with him. There was nothing flashy about him, which is perhaps why he went unnoticed. However, anyone who took a closer look would notice something different. It wasn't just the way he dressed, but the calm he emanated. He looked like someone who didn't let the chaos around him disturb his peace. While everyone else seemed rushed and anxious, Jackie remained calm. He observed everything around him as if he were absorbing the moment. He didn't mind the stares or the contrast between him and the other passengers. Just behind him in the queue was Victor Harding. Victor was the complete opposite of Jackie. He wore an expensive suit, well-shined shoes, and an eye-catching perfume. His every move seemed rehearsed, as if he wanted the world to know that he was someone important. His eyes quickly traveled down the row, and when they settled on Jackie, he couldn't hold back his comment. "First class, huh?" said Victor with a wry smile. "You never know who might show up here these days." Jackie turned her head and looked at him, keeping her expression serene. "Yes, the world is full of surprises," she replied calmly. Victor frowned for a moment. He seemed to expect a bigger reaction, something that would confirm what he thought about the man in front of him. But Jackie remained silent, as if the comment didn't matter. Victor decided to insist. "Look, nothing personal, but you don't look like the kind of person who flies like that," he said, laughing softly. "It's rare to see someone so casual in first class." Boarding time arrived. The first-class queue began to move, and Jackie and Victor, without exchanging any more words, proceeded with their tickets in hand. Victor, as usual, walked with firm, confident steps, while Jackie seemed oblivious to the commotion around them, walking at the same calm pace as before. When they finally got on the plane, something unexpected happened. As Victor reached his seat, he checked his ticket again, and, as he looked up, he saw Jackie settling into the seat next to his. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered Victor, shaking his head in disbelief. He sat down next to Jackie and let out a low laugh, as if the situation was a joke. Of all the possible places, it had to be here. Jackie just looked at him with the same serenity as before and gave a slight smile. "I guess we'll be traveling together then," she replied politely. Victor crossed his arms, trying to hide his discomfort. It wasn't just the fact that he was sitting next to Jackie, but the idea that the man he had judged minutes before was now sharing the same exclusive space as him. He couldn't explain why, but Jackie's presence bothered him in a way he couldn't ignore. As the economy-class passengers finished boarding, Victor decided to strike up a conversation, but not a friendly one. "So, what do you do for a living?" he asked in a casual tone, like someone who already had an answer in mind but wanted confirmation. Jackie, who was adjusting her backpack under the seat in front of her, looked up and answered simply, "I work with movies." Victor raised his eyebrows as if surprised. "Oh, I see. Commercials? Small things." Jackie gave a slight smile and shook her head. "Something like that," Victor laughed. "I've always found it interesting. It's interesting how people try to find their place, you know. But sometimes certain spaces just aren't for everyone, like first class, for example," Victor said with a teasing tone. Jackie Chan looked at him for a moment, assessing the situation, but kept his expression calm. "I think we all have our place," Jackie replied. "And sometimes it's exactly where we are." Victor gave a short laugh. "Nice, almost philosophical, but real life isn't that simple." Jackie didn't reply immediately. She just looked out of the window again, as if the conversation was over, but Victor wasn't willing to stop there. "You know what?" Victor said, leaning slightly towards Jackie. "You may be sitting here, But there are things money can't buy. Some places will never really belong to certain people. This time, Jackie didn't respond with words. He simply looked at Victor for a moment with an expression that combined patience and firmness. It was the kind of look that said more than any words could. Victor, realizing that his provocation hadn't had the desired effect, leaned back in his seat with a satisfied smile. He thought he had the upper hand in the situation, but the truth was that things had only just begun. Victor was convinced he was in control, but Jackie's calm hid something he couldn't predict. With each passing minute, what had seemed like a simple conversation was turning into something much bigger. With the plane already in the air, the in-flight service began. The flight attendant went around first class offering drinks, and Victor made sure he was noticed. "A glass of champagne, please," he said with a confident smile. "Something to match the exclusivity of this seat." The flight attendant, used to demanding passengers, nodded with a professional smile. When it was Jackie's turn, he made a simple request. "Just water, please." Victor didn't miss the opportunity to comment. He looked at Jackie with the same air of superiority and let out a laugh. "Water?" he asked, almost laughing. "Don't tell me you're going to waste the experience of flying first class on water." Jackie took the bottle the flight attendant handed her and replied calmly, "I'm fine with that. Sometimes simplicity is enough." Victor narrowed his eyes as if trying to decipher the answer, but then decided to retort, "Yes, I think that works for those who are content with little. Not everyone is born to enjoy the best that life has to offer." Jackie raised the bottle and took a small sip without replying immediately. Other passengers began to notice Victor's provocative tone, but as Jackie seemed indifferent, no one interfered. "Maybe best is different for each person," said Jackie, as calmly as ever. Victor didn't like that answer. He took a deep breath, trying to keep control of the conversation. Or maybe those who say that have never had access to what really matters. Some things are beyond the reach of certain people, you know? The stewardess, who was serving another passenger, cast a discreet glance in their direction as if considering intervening, but realized that Jackie was handling the situation well. "That's right," replied Jackie, with nothing more than a slight smile, looking out of the window again. Victor, on the other hand, didn't seem satisfied. He wanted to provoke more, but he was beginning to realize that Jackie was a difficult opponent to shake. Victor was convinced that he was winning the dispute, but for the passengers around him, his arrogance was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. While Jackie kept her cool, Victor was about to face a reality that would completely change his view of people. The stewardess returned to the section of the cabin where Jackie and Victor were sitting. While she poured another round of drinks, Victor decided to continue the conversation, or rather, his series of provocations. "You know, life is like flying first class," began Victor, gesturing with his champagne glass. "You work hard, you get your seat, and then you enjoy it, but some people, well, it seems like they're only here by luck." Jackie placed her water bottle on the seat table and finally turned around. Jackie turned to face Victor. His gaze remained calm, but there was something different now, as if he was ready to answer more directly. "Luck or effort, we all end up in the same place when the flight lands, don't we?" said Jackie with a calm but firm tone. The surrounding passengers, who had only been watching discreetly before, began to pay more attention. The cabin became almost uncomfortably quiet. Some exchanged glances, noticing the subtle clash between the two. Victor smiled, clearly trying to disguise the impact the answer had on him. "Well, I wouldn't say that. Some of us are simply on a higher level. Not everyone understands the value of being here." Jackie leaned forward slightly, crossing his arms. "I think the value of being here," she said, gesturing around the seat, "is not in what you have, but in how you treat others." The phrase hung in the air like an incontestable truth. Some passengers nodded discreetly while others exchanged looks of approval. Victor, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable. He tried to laugh, but his nervousness was starting to show. "That was a good one. Self-help philosophy in first grade. Maybe you should consider giving motivational talks," he said, trying to keep his sarcastic tone. Jackie simply gave a slight smile and looked straight ahead again, ending the conversation without saying another word. Her calmness seemed to speak louder than any words. The surrounding passengers began to react subtly. Some whispered among themselves, while others looked at Victor with expressions of disapproval. A couple sitting a few rows back, who seemed to have recognized Jackie, remained silent, respecting his privacy but clearly admiring the way he had handled the situation. Victor, for his part, began to realize that he was being watched, and not in a positive way. His once confident demeanor began to change subtly, but he still wasn't ready to admit that he had lost control. Victor thought he was winning the dispute, but the reactions around him told a different story. He didn't yet know that what was to come would make him question everything he believed about status, power, and respect. As the steward passed by collecting empty glasses, Victor seemed determined to win the debate he had started. "You know what's funny?" he continued. "People who have nothing to show for themselves always talk about things like humility and simplicity. Have you noticed that?" Jackie leaned forward slightly, looking directly into Victor's eyes. "I've noticed that sometimes the people who talk the most about what they have are the ones who feel the emptiest inside." The words hung in the air for a few seconds, and Victor seemed momentarily stunned, struggling to find an answer. He opened his mouth but couldn't form the right words straight away. The surrounding passengers exchanged glances, some visibly impressed with the way Jackie handled the provocations. "Look, I don't mean to be rude," said Victor, finally recovering, "but the world is competitive. If you don't show what you've got, people will ignore you. That's how things work." Jackie leaned back in her seat and replied calmly, "Maybe, but I don't think real success needs to be shouted to the four winds. It speaks for itself." Jackie's words seemed to carry a weight that reverberated throughout the cabin. Some passengers nodded discreetly while others cast disapproving glances at Victor, who clearly wasn't used to being challenged in this way. By now, the atmosphere in first class had changed. Many passengers were now fully attentive to the exchange between Jackie and Victor. An older man sitting nearby turned to look more closely, shaking his head as if disapproving of Victor's behavior. Victor, aware of the stares, tried to disguise his irritation, but instead of backing down, he launched into another provocation. "Cheap philosophy. It may sound nice, but the real world doesn't work like that." Jackie looked at him, still maintaining the same calm expression. "The real world is made up of people, Victor. And in the end, the way we treat others says more about who we are than anything else." Victor was visibly uncomfortable with the answer. He glanced around, noticing the attentive gazes of the other passengers. Victor looked around, noticing that the passengers' attention was no longer on him. Some whispered among themselves, while others looked directly at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Victor began to understand that his strategy of domination wasn't working. He believed he had the upper hand, but the impact of Jackie's words was changing passengers' perceptions, and perhaps even his own. The tension in the cabin was palpable. Victor crossed his arms, trying to disguise the discomfort caused by Jackie's words, but his irritation was beginning to show. Jackie, on the other hand, seemed oblivious to the atmosphere. He turned directly to Victor and broke the silence with a calm tone. "You know, Victor, I understand what you're saying. The world can be very competitive, but I've learned that sometimes the need to prove something to others comes from something deeper. An insecurity, an internal conflict." Victor frowned, uncertain whether this was a provocation or a genuine attempt at conversation. "Internal conflict?" he said, laughing. "I don't know where you got that idea, but you couldn't be more wrong." Jackie gave a slight smile and shook her head. "Maybe, but I've met a lot of people who thought that success was only about what others could see. Deep down, they were just trying to fill something that was missing inside them." The words hit Victor unexpectedly. He was silent for a moment, fiddling almost absent-mindedly with the ring on his finger, but quickly regained his defensive tone. "That's not me. Everything I've achieved has been through hard work, and I don't need anyone to tell me how to live my life." Jackie remained calm, as if carefully choosing his next words. He watched Victor for a few seconds before continuing. "I'm not saying You didn't work hard. I just think that sometimes we get so caught up in the idea of showing off what we've achieved that we forget to look inwards. Who are we without all this? Victor pressed his lips together, visibly uncomfortable. The question seemed to echo in his mind, but he wasn't willing to admit that it had touched him. Who are we? He replied with a cynical laugh. We are what we build. Without that, we're nothing. Jackie held his gaze, her expression now more serious. I disagree. I think we're defined by what we do for others, not by what we accumulate. In the end, the things we show the world matter less than what we carry inside, she said, pointing to her own chest. The words resounded throughout the cabin. Some passengers nodded discreetly while Victor seemed to struggle to keep his composure. That's easy for you to say, said Victor, almost rising from his seat. You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through to get here, Jackie replied firmly, but without raising her voice. You're right. I don't know your story, but I don't think I need to know you to realize that sometimes when someone feels the need to shout about what they've achieved, it's because they're trying to hide something. Fear, insecurity, loneliness. The statement hit like a brick. Victor froze, his face red with anger and perhaps shame. He clenched his fists, clearly struggling to hold back an outburst. Finally, Victor lost his composure. He stood up abruptly, knocking his empty champagne glass to the floor. You think you're better than me? So he shouted, attracting the attention of everyone in the cabin. Sitting there with your catchphrases, acting like you know everything about life. But you don't know anything about what it's like to live in the real world. The passengers remained silent, shocked by Victor's outburst. The flight attendant quickly approached, trying to calm the situation. Jackie remained seated, looking at Victor calmly. He waited for the man to finish speaking before replying. I don't think I'm better than you, said Jackie in a firm but gentle tone. I just think that sometimes we need to stop and think about what really matters. And Victor, you don't need to prove anything to anyone. Victor sat down again, looking away. He looked more defeated than angry. He remained silent, with Jackie's words echoing in his mind. He had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, in front of so many people. But he still didn't know that the worst, or perhaps the best, was yet to come. The flight followed in heavy silence after the confrontation. Victor remained in his seat, avoiding looking at Jackie, but it was clear that he was deeply shaken. Jackie, on the other hand, seemed completely relaxed, as if nothing had happened. A short while later, the flight attendant approached Jackie with a polite smile. Her voice caught the attention of the entire cabin. Minus Mr. Chan, the captain has asked me to inform you that your connection in Tokyo has been confirmed. He also sends his best regards. The name Chan echoed through first class. Some passengers who had been watching in silence until then widened their eyes. A murmur began to spread through the cabin, and it was at that moment that Victor froze. Chan, he muttered, almost in disbelief. Jackie Chan? Jackie nodded politely to the flight attendant and thanked her without paying much attention to the commotion. Then he turned to Victor, who was now staring at him as if he were seeing a ghost. Is something wrong, Victor? Jackie asked with a slight smile. Victor opened his mouth but couldn't form a sentence. He looked around, noticing other passengers watching him curiously and, in some cases, with disapproving looks. He seemed completely lost. Victor sank into his seat, visibly uncomfortable. He began to mumble a few words, trying to justify his actions. Minus, I had no idea. I mean, you didn't say who it was, he finally managed to say. I didn't know you were you. Jackie kept her tone calm, but her words carried firmness. I didn't think it was necessary. I don't usually use my name as a calling card. Victor remained silent for a moment before trying to defend himself. Look, I didn't mean to offend you. I just didn't know who I was talking to. Jackie let out a small sigh and leaned forward slightly. Victor, what you said doesn't change just because you now know my name. The truth doesn't depend on who you're talking to. It depends on how you choose to treat people. The words left Victor speechless. He looked at Jackie, then at the other passengers, who now seemed even more aware of what was going on. The humiliation on his face was undeniable. The silence in the cabin was broken by Jackie, who decided to conclude the conversation with a final lesson. You know, Victor, life is hard enough for everyone. The last thing we need is people trying to diminish others in order to feel bigger. Victor nodded slightly, unable to argue. For the first time, he seemed to genuinely reflect on his actions. Jackie leaned back in her seat, effectively ending the conversation. Meanwhile, Victor remained motionless, staring at his hands as if he were reliving every word in his mind. Victor had not just been confronted by Jackie, but by reality itself. He began to realize that, in his attempt to humiliate someone else, he had revealed more about himself than he had ever intended. The rest of the flight was marked by a heavy silence. Victor, who had previously seemed to dominate the space, was now visibly uncomfortable. He could barely face Jackie or the other passengers. The arrogance he had carried at the beginning of the journey had disappeared, replaced by something much closer to shame. As the minutes passed, Victor couldn't stop thinking about Jackie's words. Everything he had said seemed so simple, but at the same time deeply impactful. Victor began to question his own behavior, remembering how many times he had judged people without even trying to get to know them. Maybe he's right, he muttered to himself without realizing it. He glanced at Jackie, who was calmly reading a book, as if nothing had happened. This only amplified the impact of the situation. Jackie made no effort to prove himself. He simply let his actions speak for themselves. As the plane began to prepare for landing, Victor finally gathered the courage to say something. Victor turned to Jackie, his eyes still downcast, and said, "I need to apologize, not just because you are who you are, but because I was arrogant. I acted like an idiot." Jackie looked at him, her expression as calm as ever. She waited a moment before replying, "I appreciate the apology, but more than that, I hope you learn from it." Victor nodded slowly, realizing that those words were an opportunity for change. Jackie continued, "Sometimes, what we look for most in the world is what we find least within ourselves. I hope you discover what really matters." Victor remained silent, but Jackie's words stayed in his mind. He knew that this moment had the potential to change something inside him, if he allowed it to. After disembarking, Victor stood in the terminal, watching Jackie walk away. He saw fans discreetly approaching him to say hello and take photos. Jackie greeted everyone with patience and a genuine smile, without haste or arrogance. It was clear that her simplicity and kindness came from within. Victor looked at his own hands and sighed. He knew he needed to change. Jackie's words still echoed in his mind, a reminder that a person's true worth lies not in their status, but in how they choose to treat others. As Jackie disappeared into the airport crowd, Victor felt something new: hope. Maybe that meeting hadn't been a coincidence. Maybe it was a chance to start over. In the end, we all carry choices that shape who we are. Are we living to impress others or to become better people? Jackie's words leave a clear lesson. True success is not in what you achieve or show off, but in the positive impact you leave on the world and the lives of those around you. So the next time you find yourself in a judgmental or conflicted situation, remember, respect and humility never go out of style. And perhaps the change you want to see in the world needs to start with you. If you like this story, we have many others that will warm your heart. Click on the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.